Do you want me to hand out your handouts? Is it working?
Sure. Yeah. Just
We're
we're live.
Yeah.
Live from New York.
Are the Yankees on there?
Yeah.
Don't need nearly this many today. Don't need nearly that many today.
Uh-uh.
All right. Good morning. We're going to be looking at 2 Samuel chapter 18 and just a few verses into chapter 19 today, as this revolution led by David's son Absalom is kind of wrapped up, and just more family fun and games with David and his family. But one thing I find kind of interesting going through this, and it kind of struck me more this morning. Actually, I was standing in the service thinking about teaching instead of listening to the sermon, I'll admit. Imagine that. As we go through this, I'm going to ask, I think as we go through, there are different people involved in the story as it unfolds here. And it's kind of interesting to think about what's going through that person's head at this time. What's going through Joab's head? What's going through David's head? Why are these people thinking? Why are these people saying what they're saying? Why are they doing what they're doing? Because to me, what's really fascinating about all of this is what does it say to us about us? Can we see ourselves in this story? Can we see ourselves in this story anywhere? Or what would we be doing if we were part of this? So I'm just going to go ahead and read chapter 18, and then we'll get into discussion. Actually, I'm going to read part of chapter 18 because it's a long chapter. I'll read the first 18 verses. 2 Samuel chapter 18. David mustered the men who were with him. Now remember, David has left Jerusalem. He's kind of on the run because Absalom's leading most of Israel against his father. So David has left Jerusalem and has gone to what's it called?
Yeah, where is that?
Mahanaim is the name of this. I'm glad you asked because I was ready to show you.
Is it Gilgal or something?
I don't know. So Jerusalem is down here. So he's fled to Mahanaim, which is on the other side of the Jordan River. About here, they think it was. And the events are all of this chapter are going to take place actually just north of there. What's called the woods, the forest of Ephraim, or Ephraim Forest, however you want to characterize it. So we're over on the east side of the Jordan River for this chapter. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent the troops out, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. The king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. So that's the first place where you say, now why does David want to go out? Well, do we remember what happened the last time David stayed home when the army went out? Maybe he's thinking, maybe I should just go ahead and go on out and let's not go there again.
I think he wants to make sure that Absalom isn't killed.
Yeah, you're a little ahead here, but that may be part of it. That this is setting up a real conflict as we'll all see here very soon.
I live my life just a little ahead.
Yeah, you always were ahead of your time.
Yeah.
But the man said, you must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care, but you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support in the city. The king answered, I will do whatever seems best to you. So that's interesting. It's a kind of an acknowledgement, and maybe this is a part of, it's like almost, David, he's really kind of a loser at times. Other times he's really a man after God's own heart. It's like he's back into being good leader mode all of a sudden. He wants to go lead the army, but he listens to the counsel of people of his advisors, of his generals and whatever. And maybe that's part of being a leader, is knowing when to listen, I think, to the people who you're in charge of. Sometimes they know better than you do what needs to happen. So he's willing to listen.
Stay off the roof.
Yeah. Don't go up on the roof. Well, they're not in Jerusalem, so that's not a problem. Maybe he's in a tent this time. So the king answered, I will do whatever seems best to you. So the king stood beside the gate while all the men marched out in units of hundreds and thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. The army marched into the field to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There the army of Israel was defeated by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest claimed more lives that day than the sword. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's head got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept on going. When one of the men saw this, he told Joab, which is kind of one of the strangest lines in the Bible, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. Not something you see every day. Joab said to the man who had told him this, what? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. But the man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lift my hand against the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. Now, other translations say you would have killed me. The soldier tells Joab, said, well, you would have taken David's side of it and would have killed me. So, which again is kind of an interesting to get into that guy's head. Why is he, is that really something you want to tell Joab? You want to insult him like that? Joab said, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. All right. Yeah, Bill?
Okay, so I was really intrigued when it says that more men died by the forest than died by the sword. And this forest of Ephraim. So I did a little study on that this week, and I guess that's really, it's craggy, there's big ravines, it's really rocky, it's dark because it's a forest, you can't really see where you're going.
Right.
So that's true. I mean, they actually, more men were killed in the forest than by the sword.
And that's all true, but still, these are soldiers.
Right.
But also, I mean, isn't there maybe isn't God taking a hand in this? I mean, God has caused nature itself to rise up against armies before. I'm not discounting that it may have just been that they got lost in the wilderness and died of thirst or starvation or whatever. But I'm also not going to discount maybe God, has taken a direct hand in this as well.
Yep.
But we just don't know.
Right.
We don't know. Yeah, Jeff.
I'm sure that Absalom was carrying a sword and probably a long knife. Why didn't he just cut his hair and drop?
Well, not every translation says his hair was caught.
Oh.
Some say he was caught on his neck. But it's a good question. My question is, why is he by himself?
Mhm.
Yeah.
He's leading he's leading the nation of Israel in this uprising. Has he seen that they're losing, and is he trying to sneak out? Again, we're in his head here. What's he thinking? Is he trying to sneak out? Is he trying to get away without anybody noticing?
That might be why God hung him there.
Yeah, it's hard to say. But it's an interesting thought. Why is he by himself? And also, if you look in chapter 15 in 2 Samuel, I mean, it's just kind of interesting thought. Chapter 15, verse 1, in the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. Well, where's all that? He's riding a mule by himself. Where's his chariot? Where's his horse? Where are the 50 guys with him?
Sounds like he's trying to sneak away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting thought. So let's get back to verse 5. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And that's a standard order that commanders of armies are given throughout history. I mean, when Churchill was talking to General Montgomery about the British Eighth Army in North Africa in 1942, he said, "Oh, take it easy on Rommel. Try and defeat the army, but take it easy on them." That makes no sense. So you think, what's Joab thinking? What's Abishai thinking? What's Ittai thinking? Are they thinking this guy's crazy?
Well, and 20,000 men, or they lost their lives, so they're probably thinking, this is war, this is battle, this is absolutely, he's a traitor.
Yeah. I think Joab in particular, just because of the character of his character that we've seen before this, and we'll see again, I don't think Joab's going to sit there and say, "Oh yeah, sure, we'll take it real easy on him," and we see that carried out.
Those are Civil War numbers.
Yeah, they are.
20,000 in one day.
Yeah.
So but then you put yourself in David's shoes. He's trying to save his son. We talked last time. Well, we didn't talk last week
He's done that
because Heather was talking last week.
when he let Absalom come back into Jerusalem, that was his first mistake.
Well, his first mistake was probably bringing up a spoiled kid. Anyway, we talked about that before too. But yeah, this is all led to this. How he was raised, how he was treated. It's all kind of seems to have led in part to this. That Absalom he is who he is. So the army of Israel, they're basically wiped out, whether it's being lost in the wilderness or an act of God, however it happens, they're defeated. And then Absalom it seems to me he's trying to get away by himself, trying to sneak off, and he gets caught. But why does Joab? Is it just because Joab sees that Absalom basically is a threat? And he needs to be eradicated. Is that it? Or is there any other reason why Joab might have something against Absalom? Like setting his field on fire. And I forgot about that too till I saw some commentary said, and remember, Absalom set his fields on fire. Which Joab, I think, is the kind of guy wouldn't take that too well. So it's hard, whether it's Joab just sees this is a threat, we need to handle it now, or I really just don't like this kid, or a little bit of everything. For whatever reason, Joab he sees what he thinks needs to happen, and he goes about and does it, which seems to be just that kind of guy. He says he's going to make a decision and he's going to do it.
Don't you find it? I like the translation that now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair. I mean, you think about Absalom and his, so they described him, he was just so handsome and so probably full of himself and this long hair. I guess it was just that the girls were probably swooning. And yet that's what got caught. And he was just so prideful and so full of himself. And that was his downfall. Kind of
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. If it was his hair.
I know. If
Yeah.
it was, I like
No
that.
matter what, he was left looking foolish.
Exactly. Yes.
That's just, it's a sad way to end. It's really,
It is.
it's sad. In fact, I found some paintings of that incident I was going to put on the handout,
Oh, yeah.
but they were just so sad. Just like this poor guy's just hanging there, and Joab's got these 3 spears or darts or javelins, or it's just terrible.
Like, why did he need 3?
Well, but he puts 3 in his heart and he's still alive.
And he's still alive, and then 10 other guys jump on him.
Killed him.
He was really dead.
It's really good.
Maybe if they cut his hair off.
Yeah. Anyway,
What did he end up
Loses
telling
power.
David?
Samson.
What did he end up telling David?
who?
Joab.
Well, we're getting to that.
Okay.
We're getting to that. You're getting ahead of yourself again. So Absalom meets a sad end. He probably deserved it. In Exodus says the penalty for striking or even cursing your parents is death. So, I mean, just by the law of Moses, he should have been killed. And then another interesting thing, Absalom, it talks about in verse 18. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in King's Valley as a monument to himself, because I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. In chapter 14, verse 27 says 3 sons and a daughter were born to Absalom.
Yeah.
So, and we don't know how old Absalom is, but I'm guessing, he's maybe 30, in his 30s at most, if David is around 60 maybe. So, I mean, were his sons all killed? Well, he had already erected the monument to himself, so maybe his 3 sons died at a young age, or we don't really know, but at one point he had 3 sons, and now enough time has passed since they apparently died that he's had time to say, I need to erect a monument myself, because that's the only way my name is going to live on. It's just kind of an interesting tidbit there as well. So let's go on. I'll read the rest of chapter 18, starting at verse 19. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, who was one of the priests, son of Zadok, said, let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has delivered him from the hand of his enemies. You are not the one to take the news today, Joab told him. You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today, because the king's son is dead. Then Joab said to a Cushite, go tell the king what you've seen. The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite. But Joab replied, my son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward. He said, come what may, I want to run. So Joab said, run. Then Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain and outran the Cushite. I tried to look up how far they were running. My best guess is it probably no more than 10 miles. But still, a 10-mile run is pretty good.
Almost.
Joab said, run, and Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain and outran the Cushite. While David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up to the roof of the gateway by the wall. And as he looked out, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out to the king and reported it. The king said, if he's alone, he must have good news. And the man came closer and closer. So David says, well, if it's just one of them, it's good news. Then the watchman saw another man running, and he called down to the gatekeeper, look, another man running alone. The king said, Well, he must be bringing good news too. So if one means good news, you would think he's thinking, well, two would be bad news. But all of a sudden there's two, and now he says, well, it's still good news. I'm guessing, again, getting into David's head, he's just hoping for the best. He's hoping for, he's just maybe it's wishful thinking. He's hoping that it's good news because he doesn't want to hear the bad news. King said he must be bringing good news too. The watchman said, it seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. Oh, he's a good man, the king said. He comes with good news. So if he were a bad man, he would be bringing bad news. Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, all is well. He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up the men who lifted their hands against my lord the king. The king asked, is the young man Absalom safe? And maybe Ahimaaz says, oh, wait a minute. I don't think I want to answer this question. Ahimaaz answered, well, I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant to me, your servant. I don't know what it was. The king said, stand aside and wait here. So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, my lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has delivered you today from all who rose up against you. The king asked the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? Basically, David is saying, yeah, big whoop, so what? We won the battle. I don't care. What about Absalom? Tell me the important news. The Cushite replied, may the enemies of my lord, the king, and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you, oh, Absalom, my son, my son. So it's obvious, where David's heart is, what he's concerned about. He's letting his emotions kind of run away with him. Bill?
Yeah, when you read that story about the Cushite getting the bad news, like you said, that's a very hard thing to do, because if you go back to when David found out Saul was killed, he killed the Amalekite for bringing that news to him.
Yeah.
And so I could see where that could be a real problem for the Cushite in this case.
Yeah.
Wouldn't want to be that person.
If he even knew about it, then,
right.
Yeah.
But in this case, he didn't actually kill Absalom. In the other case, the Amalekite.
Yeah,
he
true.
killed Saul. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't want to have to be the bearer of that news at all.
Well, and maybe that may be why Joab told Ahimaaz, no, I'm not
Right.
sending you, because who knows what David might do if you tell him the bad news. I'm not going to put you through that. But I got this Cushite right here. Yeah, Heather.
Do we have any idea why Ahimaaz was so anxious to do this? Did you
Well,
anything?
I have
Kinda
that question
curious.
here. Why did he want to do that? And that goes right in with, let's get into everybody's head. And I don't know why. Nobody even speculates why he wanted to do that. Why would he want to be the one to do that?
It was like he was so excited to do it. I was just curious.
I don't know.
And
It's a
then
good.
when push came to shove, he lied.
He wanted to
Well,
carry
he
the
wanted to
news, and then he
tell
didn't
the
give
good
the
news.
news.
He didn't
Right.
want
Tell
to-
the news.
Yeah,
He didn't
that's
want to be
true.
the bearer, he just
Yeah.
wanted to watch.
Yeah.
Some people are like that, you know?
Yeah,
Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Other people's, grief, that they're happy about grief.
right.
Some people don't like that.
Maybe he was caught up in the excitement of the moment. He said, "Oh, I want to be part of this. I want to be a participant. I want to do something."
Yeah.
I don't know.
Did he have a special relationship with David somehow that we have ever picked up on? Seemed
No.
like he maybe.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
But they obviously knew him.
Uh-huh.
The watchman said, "Oh, he runs like Ahimaaz."
Yeah. Maybe he just really respected him or something.
Yeah.
Ahimaaz.
I don't know. So David has gotten the bad news. He's worried. That seems to be the only thing he cares about. Verse 33, oh, my son Absalom, my son, if only I had died instead of you. One commentator made the point, says, well, it's interesting. David never said, oh, Uriah, if only I had died instead of you. Let's get back to where this all started. but he's overcome with emotion. All right. And then we're going to do first 8 verses of chapter 19. I'll go ahead and read those. Joab was told, "The king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." And for the whole army, the victory that day was turned into mourning, because on that day the troops heard it said, "The king is grieving for his son." The men stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. The king covered his face and cried aloud, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab went into the house of the king and said, "Today you have humiliated all your men who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come upon you from your youth till now." So the king got up and took a seat in the gateway. When the men were told the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came before him. All right, so Joab kind of lays it on the line. I mean, there are a lot of things to admire about Joab. Some things not to admire, but he's not afraid to say what needs to be said sometimes. And is that isn't that a lesson for all of us as well? That sometimes you have to say something. You're going to lose everything. You've done stupid things before. This may be the worst if you don't do something to change this. Heather and I have talked several times here over the last couple of weeks how much we kind of like Joab. He's an interesting guy. He's a fascinating guy, and you kind of wish we knew more about him.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't come to a real great end, but as we'll get to eventually. But there's a lot to respect about him, about the way he does a lot of things. That he knows what he believes, that's for sure. So I like that. He just lays on the line with David. He says, "You got to do something. I'm going to be honest with you. That's the way it is." So I want to spend some time talking about David. It's going to rain. David, we talk every so often, talk about David as kind of a precursor to Jesus. Kind of a lot of what happens reminds us sometimes of Jesus. And this whole thing about David's, I don't know, is it a refusal or an inability or an unwillingness to do anything against Absalom? He wants his son back. He still loves his son. He doesn't want to see him hurt, doesn't want to see anything happen to him, in spite of everything that Absalom is doing to kill him, to lead a revolt, to overthrow him, to kill him, to do all this stuff. Yet David is unwilling to do anything, wants to be, tries to save him. And we've talked before, it's a conflict between what you feel God is telling you to do. There's a conflict sometimes, what God you think tells you to do and what your heart tells you to do, what you want to do for your family, even if it's not maybe really a good idea to do that. It's hard sometimes to do things that might hurt somebody that you know or that you love. David doesn't want to do that. But is it really just because he loves him, or because this is an example? I mean, do we always do things that are going to please Jesus? Are we always doing things that will advance the faith, to advance the word of God, to be examples to other people? Yet, does Jesus cast us aside? Does Jesus, turn his back on us? Is there not certainly a large measure of grace and forgiveness and mercy in our relationship to Jesus?
And then one of the things that strikes me about how easy it seemed that the people of Israel turned on David so quickly. Here's King David, anointed by God, has done great things in the name of God, and Absalom rises up. Next thing you know, all of Israel's turned against David. He's
Yeah.
on the run.
Right.
That really surprised me. Just shows you how fickle people really are. Doesn't take much to turn a whole nation against one person.
Right.
Yeah.
Which again recalls Israel turning against Jesus. The
Yeah.
people in Jerusalem turning against Jesus. It's and that's a good. I hadn't thought of that one as well. That's a nice comparison, is it not? Yeah, Jim.
Just another fine example, and humans put another human on a pedestal and they do one bad thing.
Yeah.
And they're willing to crucify him.
Well, if you put an imperfect human on a pedestal, I mean, I'm not talking about Jesus, but if you put
Yeah.
put anybody on a pedestal, eventually
They're gonna
They're gonna be-
disappoint.
you're going to be disappointed, right?
Disappointing, you're gonna knock them down.
Yeah. That's a good one as well. So, yeah, Ron?
He could have hoped that, Absalom would repent of all the wickedness he did.
Yeah.
If possible. But unfortunately, God allows things, and Absalom didn't, wasn't obedient to the king and rebellious against him, so he allowed it, right?
Yeah.
Or he wouldn't have been caught in the tree in the first place. It must have been a high tree or something, because,
Well, I don't know. Mules aren't that tall, are they?
well, I know, but I just wondered how in the world. It's 'cause who was it? Joab or somebody said, "Why didn't you cut him, let him drop and apparently die from dropping?" Is that what it meant?
No, I think Joab meant, why didn't you just go and kill him while he was
I
hanging
thought he
there?
said, "Why?"
Because that's what Joab was going to do.
Yeah.
Or he said, why didn't you do what I would do?
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris?
I think he's got a point though about, you want to try to be merciful to people as long as possible, even till death. Because everybody has an 11th hour, hopefully.
Yeah,
Right.
and you're right. That was a
Especially
good point.
your
That
relative.
we're always waiting
Your
for
son.
a change of
Yeah.
heart. We're waiting for them to change, and it's a kid. Maybe it's never too late.
I mean, I think
Um,
all fathers and mothers hope that their children are saved,
Mhm.
Mhm.
Exactly.
really truthfully.
Maybe when David asked Abishai and Joab and Ittai, when he said don't hurt Absalom, maybe Joab should have called him aside then and said, "Can we talk about this?
Yeah.
Right.
Do you understand what's going on here?"
Yeah.
And maybe David could have said, "Well, I'm hoping he's going to change his mind," and convince Joab to not, that yes, there was still a chance. That he was hoping there was still a chance.
Mhm.
It's like the
But-
prodigal son.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. But I think you're right, Ron. There may have been a measure of a hope for
Yeah.
repentance or a change of heart in that as well.
Mhm.
I don't want to say David was in an easy spot at all.
Uh-huh.
He's in a terrible spot. Whether it was his own making or not, it doesn't make it any easier. It makes it worse, probably. Makes it a tougher spot.
Do you think the Lord told him to ask for taking it easy on Absalom? Or do you think that was just his own doing?
Well, that was kind of maybe that's kind of part of my question. I mean, is David's refusal to condemn his son, how similar is that to Jesus's refusal to condemn us?
Mhm.
Maybe it's God speaking through David that there's still hope. I don't
Well,
know.
look at what David did, and still was a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
He did things that were pretty
Yeah.
rebellious.
Right.
I mean, even to the point where God wouldn't even let him build the temple because of all the blood.
Right.
Right.
I mean, there's always a payment somehow, or, there's always a, you may die in this lifetime, but live in eternity. Basically, you still have to pay somehow in this life for and it's death. Everybody has to die. So
Right.
there's even if you lived a pretty decent life, it's still not perfect.
Yeah, it's just pretty decent. It's, yeah,
Pretty decent
Yeah.
in your eyes,
yeah.
maybe.
Who knows? Yeah, Heather?
Well, and David seemed to have a real understanding of the Lord's mercy. You think back when, his infant son, remember he fasted and he wept, he was like, not eating and not getting cleaned up and, hoping that the Lord was going to save this infant child. And then once the child died, he's like, oh, they were afraid to tell him, and he goes and starts eating, and well, the Lord didn't save him, but, I'll see him someday. He just had a real understanding. Maybe he just thought, he might save Absalom. There's still some, he's a very merciful God. And he was holding out hope, like we all do for, for our kids and for people. And we never know, you hear stories all the time where people just turned around and they were so in such a dark place. And it was, they all of a sudden, so yeah,
There's always hope.
There's always hope. And he was still holding on to that hope, I think.
Yeah, and we need to remember I think you need to remember that, while David, he kind of fell apart when he heard the news at first, but once Joab kind of sat him down and gave him, David seems to have gotten over it. He doesn't mention Absalom again. The name doesn't come up. He gets over it the way he seems to have gotten over the loss of his infant son. Said, I can't change it. So let's just move on. He had to get through that, and Joab was there to kind of help him through it. And let's see, that's what I got. Let's see if I've got anything else. Kind of a quick lesson today. Yeah, Bill?
There's another part of that too, to finish that part of it up. David didn't even go back to try to recover his body. They had buried him in a ravine under a bunch of rocks, and you would think that he would at least want to put him in a family plot of some kind. Just left him out
I
there.
thought of
in the
that.
ravine.
That's
Yeah.
a great thought.
Yeah, he realized he's got to be done with it. Just maybe bringing him back, he thinks might just cause more problems. Because I think there are still a few people around who still don't want David to be king. Who still think Saul was the rightful king, and there's still people going to cause trouble. So maybe he's just thinking, maybe I should just leave it alone. That's a good thought.
He already built a monument to himself, so.
Yeah.
It's all
Already
taken care of.
taken care of.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, build my own monument. That's a good idea. All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll be on our way. Dear God, thank you for your word. To take from it what we can use, what will help us, what will just help us learn what we need to take. Be with us this week. Keep us all safe. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you all.
On a rainy day.
Go stay dry.
That's
Really
pouring down there.
We're gonna get back.
Yes.
We're gonna get back.
You got some money?
She didn't
Yeah.
know.